university life can be, quite a scary prospect. Of course, you wonder if you'll actually do well, if you'll cope, what will life be like when you're actually out of there? I thought, well, since I'm a computer science major who has recently graduated, let's actually, have a little bit of a sharing of my experiences and more importantly, my mistakes in my life as a computer science undergraduate. Let's talk more about this after the break. Hello and welcome back to another Random Wednesday episode. Now, in the past I've actually made, a video that is sort of thematically similar called What to Expect in a Computer Science Course. Surprisingly, it was quite well received. I've actually gotten many questions from a lot of curious prospective students who want to know more. If you haven't watched that video already, I've actually sort of broken things down into a Q&A kind of style. I put out 8 common questions that people may be asking, and I gave you my perspective on each of them. Now, one of the questions I devoted several minutes to in that particular video is how to actually do well in a computer science course. I did feel like, I distilled some of the most important points in that answer, but at the same time, well, it doesn't do 4 years of experience justice. I definitely have quite a bit more to share on that particular topic, so I thought, well, why not make it a full video? The theme of this video is good, and the whole point is I'm going to share with you some tips on how to do things good. And while this video is designed primarily for computer science majors, really I think there are some tips in there that will work for everyone. So yeah, without further ado, let us jump right in. First and foremost is taking good notes. Now, there is a very huge mistake you should not be making as a computer science student, and in fact as a student in general, and that is to never just copy the lecturer verbatim. I have a rule of thumb for taking good notes, and that is filter and rephrase. Let's take a look at what this means. Starting off with filter. The whole point of filtering is you want to minimize the amount of notes you have to take. Not only does that, sort of reduce the stress on your part when you're in the lecture, it also means you've got less things to study at the end of the year. One important thing about filtering is that, well, if what the lecturer says makes sense, don't bother writing it down. If it's something that, sort of already clicks for you, there's no real point taking a note of it. In your notes, you should draw attention to the things that are not immediately clear. Highlight, write down, do whatever you need to point out the things that, you might want to call your attention to at a later point when you're doing your revision. So that's filter. The next part is rephrase, and this is what it means. You have to think of this as a challenge. Every new learning point should be expressed in your notes in your own words, and using as little of them as possible. And as a computer science specific tip, you want to actually avoid writing down code or anything that directly references code. Be as high level, be as conceptual as possible, and stay away from what is implementation specific. Now, there is a very good reason why we want to do things this way. By filtering and rephrasing, you're forcing yourself to think. Now, if you were to just, basically transcribe everything the professor says, you can do it while you're half asleep. You don't have to actually pay attention, you don't have to actually, try to assimilate that information at all. You're just sort of being a pass-through, turning words you hear into words you're writing down. And that's not helpful. At the end of the day, you also benefit because you only write down what you really need. What that means is when you're revising, you don't have to crawl through a whole bunch of stuff you already know, just to find that 1 or 2 things that you might need more help on. The additional advantage to this is you've already expressed things in your lingo, in something that you've rephrased, you've tailor-made to make sense to yourself. And that of course makes things easier when you're revising. Our second tip is coding in good time. Now, if you don't have any prior experience in programming and you're going into, a programming degree fresh, you may feel a little bit of pressure because, you've kind of got to catch up with a lot of stuff at the beginning. Of course, this isn't just, purely a beginning issue. As you move up to other modules, you may find that, you have to quickly learn a concept or a programming language, and in the worst case, you may even have to unlearn some of the things you've learned before. Here are a few tips for you to learn and adapt quickly. Starting from the first, learning to, sort of dance with your compiler, as I like to call it. I've mentioned this briefly in a previous video, but the whole point is, don't ignore what the compiler is telling you. I get it, errors are frustrating, nobody likes them. But the point is, your compiler is there to help you. There is useful information in the error messages given to you by a compiler, and even if it isn't immediately obvious, you have to learn to actually try and understand what it's saying. Of course, compilers have their quirks. Normally, compilers can only report symptoms to you, they cannot actually tell you where the root cause is. A prime example of this is a compiler giving you the wrong line number. It may be off by 1, it may be at the line where, the problem actually occurs, even though its root cause may come earlier. What you should do is to learn these quirks quickly. You want to be able to sort of jump to the line that exhibits a symptom and be able to correlate it back to a cause, usually earlier. Earlier I mentioned unlearning, and that could be one big hurdle as well. Now, I've seen this the most in web development, but you may come across a framework that just does things in a completely different way, and that makes it very hard for you to, just jump in and do the stuff you need to do. The frameworks usually do this because, there is a good reason for it, there is some design principle that they're trying to follow, and your best bet is to get comfortable with the principle first. If you don't understand the principle, trying to adapt to the weirdness of the framework is going to be extremely difficult. One example of this is a framework I briefly used called React. Now, in React, passing information has to be done in a very specific way. And it turns out the reason for this is if you do it right, only areas of a web page that have been actually updated will get changed. The entire page does not need to refresh. You're gonna need to understand and internalize this root concern before you can actually make full use of the package in a way it's, intended to be used. If you're having serious troubles moving from one language to another, you may want to compile a list of, the differences between the language you're using and the languages you're familiar with, and sort of just leave that around as a cheat sheet. Alright, let's move on to our next tip, developing good programs. Now, bear in mind this is different from the coding points I've mentioned earlier. This one is about delivering a good product. Now, chances are you'll be doing some kind of large-scale project, and having skills like this will help you a lot. What I'm about to talk about, will be covered in a software engineering course, which is why, I'm sort of gonna jump ahead a little bit and give you a module recommendation. If you're in a degree or if you want to be in a line of work that does coding in any way at all, it will be greatly to your advantage to actually see if your school has a software engineering course. Just an introductory one, it doesn't have to be, a very high level one. A course like that will equip you with the skills to, plan better and write better code that is easier to read and easier to maintain. And that can only mean good things for you. So definitely try and, expose yourself to such concepts. Anyway, the main part of this point is that you have to be able to see things from the user's point of view. Now, as programmers, we're not always very good at doing that, and that's understandable because we're technical people. Because we tend to be quite familiar with computers, we take a lot of things for granted. We assume that many things are really clear and really obvious. But that tends to not be the case for your end user. To build a good product, your product mustn't be something that only programmers can use. Put yourself in the shoes of the user and sort of look at your program through their eyes. Things have to make sense for them, and a lot of this comes down to good design. Not only will you have to have a good idea of what the user actually needs, you will also need to design your program in a way that the user can easily understand. Now, this is quite a tall order, and that's not really surprising, which is why, again, enrolling in a software engineering course is so important. A course like that exposes you to the valuable skills required to actually speak to and understand the needs of the user.
Hopefully, if all goes well, you will also be exposed to some fundamentals of design. And that entails creating a program that is intuitive to use, even for a user with limited computing knowledge.
Even if you're doing a project in an area that doesn't require you to go into such detail, well, doing this can still actually give you an advantage because you have a program that is easier to use and easier to grade. Alright, next, keeping a good outlook. Now, I'm not gonna lie, uni is gonna be stressful, there are gonna be times where you're ripping out chunks of hair. This is not just something exclusive to computer science, I'm sure this is true for any major, but there are some things you can do to make things better. Personally for me, I just need to do one big thing to keep the stress levels down, and that is to not do work last minute. That can be horribly stressful, and I think while that's true for any major, this is particularly clear in computer science. Just to quote a personal example, I was doing a last minute project at one point of time, and well, 2 days before the deadline I knew I wasn't gonna make it. That's just the nature of programming. That's just the nature of doing, projects with a certain amount of skill. Coding just isn't something you can pull an all-nighter and hope for the best. Well, at least not for most of us. Instead, coding takes time, coding takes, creative juices. So yeah, don't do things at the last minute. This doesn't just apply for projects, this applies for exam revision as well. You want to get started as early as possible. The whole reason for this is many CS concepts require you to actually practice and apply. And well, at the last minute, you haven't got any time for that. You don't even have the time to ask for help, and that can be really bad. This in fact leads me to another point, and that is to ask for help when you need it. Ask a prof or a TA for help as early as you can. Don't leave it to the last minute because, well, they're gonna be bombarded by lots of other last minute questions. They're not gonna get back to you in time. Next, picking good modules. Now, I guess this kind of depends on your university. For mine, well, I really get the freedom to select basically any course I want to do. So of course the question is, how would you handle that? What kind of courses would you pick? Now, I see two broad strategies to actually approach this. Firstly, you can of course pick the things you love. That means you're strengthening your passion, that means you're going in, fairly confident about being able to do well. The alternative is to pick things you're not familiar with, to sort of broaden your perspectives. This is great because you get a lot of breadth, you get a lot of, interesting insights from other places, but of course you run the risk of not really being able to score because it's something you're not, really comfortable with. I think both are valid, they have their pros and cons, and no matter what you choose, well, there will be some positive takeaway at the end of the day. If you're interested to take a module that you're not familiar with, but you're not sure whether it's a good idea, well, ask around. You'll probably know someone who has already taken it before, and they can give you some opinions about the course. Take this opportunity to check and see if it's suitable for you before jumping in. Some schools may require you to do what is known as breadth modules, which come from, well, other faculties, and have completely nothing to do with your major. I've had to do quite a few of these, and in fact I ended up choosing things from quite an interesting variety of subject areas. I've personally done quite a wide gamut of different topics, from biology to nutrition to things like science fiction and philosophy, things like public speaking, e-learning, astronomy. Well, yeah, I've actually taken a look at quite a lot of different weird things. I think it's definitely worth your while if you want to actually explore all these different areas and, just ramp up on your general knowledge. It will be even nicer if your school has sort of a safety net like mine does. When you're exploring, these kind of subjects from other faculties, if you have a bad grade, you can actually opt to have it not count in your transcript, which is always nice. If you have something like that, definitely go for it. Think of it this way. It is an opportunity to get yourself to find out about things that could possibly turn into long-term interests. Moving on again to our next tip, that is finding good prospects. When you're at university, true, you kind of have to study a lot, but that's not the only thing you're gonna have to do. The other important thing is to decide on your career. And well, you should actually make that decision as early as you possibly can. Remember, no last minute work on this. Go for internships, keep an eye out on the industry, prepare your resume early. Do all the things you need to do so that, when you graduate, you're just ready to jump right into the working world. I've actually heard of a pretty good strategy when it comes to having, just an interesting resume. Just have a resume template ready, and every time you make an achievement or anything of note, just add it in. You can always filter out the older things and keep the best around. And what this gives you is a resume that's interesting and ready to go at any time. At my university, a lot is done to actually prepare students for their career, which is very nice. We have career counselors, we have resume writing workshops, and yeah, lots of related stuff like that. And if your school has something like that, go for it. Get your advice as early as possible, be as confident about finding work as early as possible. If you have doubts as to what kind of work you want to do in the future, if you're unsure, well, get that resolved as early as possible. Again, if your school has a career counselor, go talk to them. These are people who are sitting there and their only job is to think about finding jobs for you. They have all these cool tools, things like questionnaires, things like interviews to sort of decide where your interests actually lie and how you can actually find a job that's good for you and allows you to actually work at your maximum capacity. Remember, go figure out all this stuff as early as you possibly can. The last thing you want to do is to actually worry about these problems after you graduate. At least decide on the kind of work you want to do before you step out of your college life. If it's possible, if you have the time, you should start looking for leads before you graduate. In fact, among my circles, quite a few of my friends have gotten employment before they've even finished their final exams. Of course, I would say this is a combination of hard work and good luck, so don't think of this as something you have to do. Just think of it as, people are doing it, so it's good that you at least try to achieve the same thing. You want to try and minimize that iffy unemployed time, between coming out of school and finding a job. Make that as short as possible so that you have, minimal uncertainties in your life. And just to end of this video on a high note, here's your 7th bonus tip, and that is having good fun. If you think about it, uni is kind of a great chance to be social, served to you on a platter. You only spend so much time in lessons, other times you get to hang around with like-minded people, so yeah, make good use of the opportunity. Try and at least make a few lasting bonds because, well, this is kinda your last easy opportunity to do that. Once you step out into the working world, these opportunities are going to come by a lot less. If you want to think about things on a more pragmatic front, well, the more people you know, the more contacts you have. In the future, if you ever need some help, well, you know these people. The thing about uni life is that it's entirely possible to sort of just sit in a corner and sort of live it out without interacting with other people. And at least in my personal experience, this is the first time in your life you sort of can get away with doing that. But all because you kinda can get away with it doesn't mean you should, because, well, I just don't think it's great for you. I kinda went through my uni life without making too much effort to be social. The result of that is I do have a small group of close friends, but that's about it. And sometimes in retrospect, I wish I could have, gone out a little bit more. Not that I really regret that, I guess, because the time I spent not socializing was spent on this channel. Yeah, it kind of depends on you to sort of weigh the pros and cons. But I guess the important point here is that you should at least make some attempt to be social, because it's good for you in the long run. Anyway, that's it. This video has ran far too long, so I'm gonna sort of cut it here. I hope these experiences will be at least a little bit meaningful to you. Hopefully you can take away something meaningful from all the stuff I've just rambled. But yeah, that's basically it from me today. Thank you very much for watching. All the best for your uni life. You're watching 0612 TV. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, consider checking out the rest of my work on my channel. Alternatively, you may be interested in a playlist of my earlier work on computing and computer science topics. If you'd like to show me some monetary support, I am on Patreon. You can find a link to my campaign in the video description. Of course, you can simply like this video or leave a comment. I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. To keep in touch with my future uploads, do subscribe to this channel. And for even more updates, check out the official Twitter account for this channel at 0612TV. Thank you for your support.